We had a very long title for this session that you probably saw listed in all of your booklets, which was about Gen AI and blockchain and XR and all these other things. But we went with a more pithy title, which is Never Mind the Metaverse, Making New Realities Real. And obviously there's a little bit of attitude to that, and I think it's because over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of conversation about what these new emerging technologies are going to be for, what their purpose is going to be, how they're going to evolve. And in that sort of slush of conversation, there's always a little bit of bullshit, So today, what we really want to talk about is coming back to both the origins of the dream and a little bit of a vision from the future. And we have some wonderful panelists with us. I'll introduce them later. But more about me, actually, for a minute. So I'm Elizabeth Vallow. I am the XR design director for Accenture Song. And when I was a little girl growing up in Brooklyn, the first time I ever hacked a computer system was hacking the Brooklyn Library so I could keep my William Gibson books longer. So I've been waiting for these texts to be here, to be real, my whole life, literally. So this has been a dream for me, and I think a lot of us have had very starry eyes as things like augmented reality have come into actual reality. But of course, in the beginning of all of these emerging technologies, there's this period of time, this horizon, where the old ways of doing things bleed into the future ways of doing things. So if you recall, in the history of TV, old TV systems, when they came to people's homes, the first commercials on those systems were radio jingles. It would be a black screen with a bouncing ball and a radio spot. And this kind of behavior, which I like to call radio on the TV, is something that happens every time there's a new tech event horizon, right? It will be old ways of doing things shoved into those new kinds of technologies. And there are some really cool stuff happening, though, in spite of that. Where we are right now, we've got incredible enterprise executions happening. I think actually XR in particular, Gen AI, have proven themselves unequivocally in enterprise, and that's in training, in health, in digital twins, et cetera. It's interesting because, in a way, the most functional kinds of executions have become the ones that are most definitely proven worthy. And then we have beautiful craft-forward things like the Gorillas exhibition, which was a total takeover of Times Square. And these things are beautiful, and it shows us the power of location and presence. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of one-offs. And I think that for these technologies to really grow up, what we need is sustained use cases. Sorry to make you eat your vegetables before we get into the fun. Sustained use cases, measurable goals, abstract thinking, which is kind of the most important part, right? If you have a company that makes X, what can we do more than just taking X and putting it into some of these formats? How do we let that format really breathe and grow and show us what it's capable of? And the combination of these disciplines will allow us to test and learn, have some benchmarks, finally, which is really difficult for some of these executions, and really help drive business growth, not just beautiful stuff. So here's the pitch. So at Accenture, we've got a vision, and we've got a methodology for approaching what we call new realities. This is our infamous three-circle diagram, which I'm sure you're learning everything about us just from that. But I think the key is to really go back actually to that radio on the TV moment, right? We've had a couple of more moments like that since. And probably the most disruptive one was ye old iPhone, right? I mean, a computer with a camera in it in your hand changed everything forever. It changed the way that we consume things. It changed authorship. It changed the voice and the attention to voice that we all give to brands and companies and each other forever. And now we're in a position where we're actually starting to break beyond this surface. Just the way we did with radio into TV, we're starting to have a third space between your body and the world and your technology. And so to get there and have this really be awesome, and not too clunky and feel great and look great and function, we're going to need generative AI because we're going to need a lot of models, right? I mean, making 3D stuff used to be really slow and really expensive. And with Gen AI, we're starting to cut through that into something that generates on its own and is also super fast and cheap and sometimes really lightweight too. And then once you're there, once you're in this third space, we're going to need stuff, right? You're going to need your money. You're going to need your memberships. You're going to need your identity. You're going to need security. You're going to need your passport. And you're going to need to have that all come with you in a way that's not a clunky wallet. My man Dave Tree over here is going to take us through that in much more detail later. But today, I've got some amazing folks on stage, and we're going to talk specifically about Gen AI and XR, which is my true love. And hopefully we'll have some really cool insights come from that. Since I have the stage and I'm allowed to talk, and this is my show right now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a couple of the big territories that me and my teams are super excited about exploring. So one of the things that we say when we're approaching sort of an open brief about how Gen AI and XR can be applied specifically to a brand, to be perfectly clear, we work a lot with B2B to C brands. So some of this is pertinent for enterprise, but a lot of it is more for consumer. We ask ourselves, how can this product and experience and brand become more interactive, more accessible, more generative, and larger than life, which is obviously the really fun and kind of sexy part of that. And some of the territories we could think about. I just wanted to have a huge unicorn on the stage, or Pegasus rather, so forgive me, but transforming spaces. As AR becomes more lightweight through the work of Gen AI, how can every space have footprints and breadcrumbs and interactions dispersed all over it so that you become accustomed to having this incredibly rich third space experience? How do we transform media? So we were just having a really cool conversation backstage about how when you're at a live event or you're watching something on TV, you're used to your second screen. What is our third screen? Right? So some of these experiences, particularly in XR, are going to be enhancing and creating this continuity between a broadcast, an event, and you. Commerce, no-brainer, especially as brick and mortar becomes less and less appealing to the modern shopper and younger shoppers. How does commerce happen everywhere? How is every interaction with an idea or a space become an opportunity to sell? And then last but not least, gaming. So this is another one that I'm obsessed with. When is gaming going to leapfrog from your set-top to your mobile, to your body, to the world all around you? When are you gaming all the time? I know some of you might shudder at that if you've got kids, but it really becomes so rich and so delicious to think about continuing your game in all different sorts of media in this really magical kind of way. So I'm going to introduce my panel now. I'm going to sit down. And this is my boss. Can I get a round of applause for James Temple, please? He's great. I just did that to embarrass you. KP, we used to work together at Meta, and he's a baller. So round of applause for KP, please, from Snap. You're all going to get it. And then Dominic from Play Hybrid, who is doing some really, really cool, foundation-breaking stuff in the industry. Give him a round of applause for Dominic. Hi.
Hello.
How you doing?
Fantastic.
That's great news.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to my spiel? What did I miss?
So I was in a client conversation actually about half an hour ago. Let's say an hour and a half ago. And it was posed to me, why do you join those three things together?
Yeah.
Surely they're three separate things, and they exist in their own rights. And I think that's true. But also what we're getting is huge traction about the convergence of these three areas of technology, around XR, around Web3 and blockchain, around Gen AI. We've been working a lot in retail and entertainment about the idea of distributing the download of a digital wallet, and via that wallet activating AR-enabled game experiences. So I can walk around my physical world, I can then consume digital tokens, they exist in my wallet, and there's a fair value exchange then between me as a customer and the brand. The brand then retains the data. They have a direct relationship with the customer, which all too often is not the case. So we're seeing a lot of opportunity and value about the convergence of these things. I will, however, it's a passion area of expertise, sort of focus on XR. One of the interesting things I think, which probably might not have been expected coming into CES, is the most noteworthy thing so far that's been communicated, from what I know, is the general availability of Apple Vision Pro at the beginning of February. I think that's pretty important. I think for everyone that's been existing in this category, I spent 5 years at Magic Leap prior to Accenture, and it's another signal of the viability of this category of computing and technology. I think a couple of things I'd call out around that as far as like opportunity that it represents are it's got very strong image fidelity. They've really doubled down on inputs. Inputs in this category is basically like how you interface with the technology. So they've looked a lot at gaze, they've looked a lot about voice interaction, they've looked at very simple gestures and how they can be utilized without it necessarily having to be directly in front of your face, for example, as was true with HoloLens. This is going to make it somewhat more intuitive to interface with the technology. I think with that, you're going to start to see a new realm of experiences uncovering, specifically around product configuration and display. You look at that thing there. Would you really want to configure that on a 24-inch display in 2 dimensions? The answer is no.
Yeah.
You want to stream that at 100% scale right in front of you in your own domain. And once you configured it, you'd probably want to take it for a drive in an environment that resonates with you. That's how this technology, I think, is going to get like a real breath of life and fresh air coming into this new advent. I'd also say it's a lot of people have been talking about remote work and how this technology can facilitate that. Apple's done an interesting thing around positioning as the multi sort of interface desktop, right? And because you think of like financial services, for example, privacy of the data you're looking at, the ability to authenticate into that environment with biometrics, that comes with a device like Vision Pro, for example, with their Optics ID. So you're starting to see things from like fidelity to interaction to like authentication and data privacy and so on, which just means that it's altogether more viable as both an enterprise and personal computing device. So I'm pretty stoked about that as being like XR being like a main stage item, like right now. I'm sure no one, obviously competitor, but it's good for the category overall.
I hear you on that, but I also think that there is available. We've all been excited about the always-on glasses, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was
small.
That was the dream from the beginning, and Spencer, who's in the audience, and we worked on Aria at Meta, which is the always-on AR glasses.
Excited
Which hopefully is going to be coming out really soon because that's more out in the world. But KP, there's still so much opportunity for really stretching out and making the most and coaxing mobile XR into its fullest expression. Thoughts on that? Because what I don't want is for people to wait, right?
Yeah.
Until Apple Vision's affordable.
I mean, look, I think the technology to some extent, whether it is VR or AR, has become a lot more affordable, although with $3,500, I wouldn't call it.
It's a lot.
But at least, from my experience, at least from both Meta and Snap, we have millions and millions of people using the technology on a daily basis on a mobile screen. And there are a lot of people that will claim, okay, but there is no form factor and stuff like that. But I would actually say it depends on the use case. When it comes to self-expression communication, I think Snap and TikTok and Instagram have proven that AR can become a vehicle for enhanced expression and communication in ways that, I think it's public knowledge, but at least on our platform, we see 250 million people engaging with AR 6 billion times a day. That's kind of mind-blowing, right? Now, I would argue that we are still scratching the surface because we haven't been able to provide the same level of engagement within, our own apps for other use cases. And so there is an opportunity for all of you to come in and embrace the technology in a way, I think, that will allow you not necessarily to leapfrog, but to be prepared for that moment when the wearables are going to become a mass market thing, right? And I'm old enough to know that, we were waiting for the year of the mobile for a very long time. And then suddenly this, guys in Cupertino managed to introduce a device that effectively made it the year of the mobile eventually. I don't believe that they're going to do it this time around. I think it's someone else's responsibility to do it this time around.
Could be.
But regardless, the point I'm trying to make is that if you really want to be ready for that moment, I think starting with a mobile, when you probably have all presence, and experimenting with the technology, and finding how the technology can solve a fundamental problem for you and your customers, will pave the way for you nicely to be prepared for that bigger moment.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And on that same topic, though, in terms of preparing ourselves and being in this liminal state, right, between that always-on future that we're dreaming of and the kinds of case studies and use cases and behavior changes that we're really trying to institute here. Dominic, you've worked on some really interesting projects, startups, which are involved in creating some of those, what I would call liminal technologies, right? They're in the space between mobile and the augmented body. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've worked on? Because it's really cool.
I think we're working on a bunch of stuff. It's funny because it's always around like getting 3D assets and then adapting it to different devices. And it will, I think there's an appetite for people to migrate those 3D assets to different platforms. By that I mean like the mobile, the AR, the VR, the Instagram AR ads, the virtual production, and now we're seeing devices that will become AR enabled. We're working.
Such as?
Well, we're working with Erratic on the AR chip that will be enabled remotely and with a whole backend platform with those guys. So
Are you allowed to say any more about that?
Without saying what's
Get
in the
in trouble.
chip, I think the idea is to enable to have some form of AR wearable engagement at the image of gaming, if you want. You know, you decide what you're going to be wearing today on your chip, or what you want to display, or how you're going to monetize it, what you want to do with it, trading. We're talking about gamification. Just building XP, wearing your Chanel bag at New York Fashion Week, that kind of stuff. So it's a mix of both, right? It's mixing reality with 3D graphics and backend, and I think that's what makes it engaging. I think the goal is to bring people back and reuse the same, engage with an AR activation more than once.
Yeah.
I guess can we get people to just decide to wear some cool stuff today? I'm gonna wear this cool high five hand floating on top of my head, and I'm gonna cross Spencer, we're gonna high five. Like, can I just wear stuff that will be interacting with people?
Yeah.
I know it sounds a little crazy right now, but.
No, not at all. You're in a good room to sound crazy. I think we're all excited about this. But you mentioned the sort of the 3D-ization revolution.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about why that's important?
Well, I think people are spending a lot of money building 3D assets. You're spending, I don't know, millions of dollars building CADs to do a BMW iX. And then where does that go? That goes to trash. So in some ways, I think there's an appetite from the studios, from the car manufacturers, from a lot of people that are coming to us to just take their data and build an archive that they can reuse on different platforms at the same time. So we'd be getting a car from a big brand, I can't say the name, and then we'll get it on Instagram ads, we'll get it on Snap, and then they want to do an ad in Unreal. So we take the thing in Unreal Engine, and then we make an ad in it, and we just reuse it in so many ways, and they archive it, they can pull it back out, they have it available to them, and that investment is just paying off by using the same asset over and over. And I think that's our focus, is we're building tools that are powered by AI and machine learning and manual stuff too, and just enable people to just build that archive that is going to be very valuable.
Yeah, KP, do you have any thoughts on sort of what is going to be the lubricant that helps that behavior change really take place? Whether it be even a hardware one or an immediate kind of production one like Dom was talking about.
I think it will be ultimately three things. The first one is the cost of the development. So if you reduce significantly the cost, I don't think there is a particular reason for anybody not to have concerns about trying it, right?
Yeah.
The second, I think, has to do a lot with how the technology leveraging those assets will deliver business objectives, to your earlier point, right? For example, just thinking out loud, right? But imagine the scenario where I can configure the Lambo, and then I decide that, you know what, I actually don't like it, right? It doesn't speak to me, right? So even if the technology is meant to be, like contributing positively, it helps the consumer make probably the right decision, but it doesn't help Lambo sell more cars. So there is a fine line between, how the technology can be used in a way that delivers business value, because without that, even if there is consumer value, then something in the equation is broken. And then the third thing, I think it has to do with your point about distribution, right? If you do something with a proprietary format that, let's say, hypothetically speaking, only works on the Vision Pro, then even if there is a proliferation of other hardware that provide the same form factor, if you have to rebuild it in a way that will require you, like an extra effort that is, like starting from zero rather than leveraging some fundamentals like maybe the 3D asset itself, then the distribution becomes like a burden.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So I have a fun question for you. We've been talking a lot of business. What kind of stuff are you excited about for this year?
For this year,
For this year,
I thought we were going further out.
No, well, I mean, so listen, I would love everyone in the room to walk away with a seed of an idea that maybe hadn't occurred to them or they hadn't realized was real now for how XR and Gen AI could actually enhance their business. Because I feel like a lot of folks are waiting, and I think that there are opportunities to tackle now. So you can talk about by category or, just as loose as you want.
I still feel that right now, through the phone and through technologies like you're talking about, there is the mechanism to unleash layers of digital content on the real world. And I feel like, we did a talk earlier in the year at Arsenal football ground. And we were sat there on a stage looking over the turf of Arsenal. And it was quite a sad thing. It's an iconic club, but the stadium was all covered, but the turf was there, but people were doing a tour. What do they want to really see? They want to see Bergkamp's goals. They want to see Henry's goals. They want to see signature signings unveiled. They want to see the cups that were lifted. There's no reason why right now that can't be achieved. Right now. I drove through London at the end of last year. Anytime you drive through London, you'll see around 50 to 100, 150 people standing outside Abbey Road Studios.
Yeah.
Abbey Road Studios is famed where the Beatles recorded a lot of their seminal hits. And obviously where a lot of the most sort of famed orchestral scores to films happen. What are they there to see? They're there to see the Beatles on the pedestrian crossing outside Abbey Road Studios. What is missing from that scene? The Beatles on the crossing. Could that be there next week? I think we could probably jam on that this afternoon and get it there. And have it persistently there across platform for people to enjoy. So when you go across, you think of Martin Luther King in Washington. Why is that not there? Right? So I think all of these things that would, we're all in our memory. They represent iconic stories and opportunities for you to engage with your real world in a more amplified way. That can happen now. And it surprises me, to be honest, that there's not more of that. Because you have the tools, you've got the tools, we've got the skills. So I think that is a huge opportunity. And I'd say that a lot of the platform companies would recognize that in the mobile phone era, there's this movement where people are starting to look down in the world, right? A couple of years ago, I walked down Regent Street at Christmas. It was pre the stores opening. People are looking down, they're walking down this street. Look up, it's amazing. I think if you start to overlay this content on the real world, you'll start to get people from down to up, a look up state. And socially, that becomes very powerful. Re-engaging with people, re-engaging the world around you. That's what I think a lot of brands should be doing in the consumer space. I'm massively passionate about that. I don't think it needs to be a like an overly composed production cost to do that.
Absolutely not.
I think that the power of Gen AI now you're starting to see, especially like a lot of the R&D activity in the 3D content creation, let alone like the 2D stuff is like in a pretty decent state of maturity to go after that. But for me, I'd love to get your perspective on this, but like I'm surprised as why there's not more. And the world is a beautiful canvas. I say to creatives, would you like 16 by 9 in film, or like, you know, or just like the monitor in front of you? Or would you like the world?
Yeah.
I know what I would take every day.
No, 100%. And slight nerd tangent from what he was talking about. So with the new capabilities for location-based pinning on most, at least web platforms, all of the native platforms and stuff like that, we could sit here together if you were so inclined, create a 3D model of the Beatles crossing Abbey Road and drop it there, and it would be there for as long as we want it to be. So a lot of the dreams of sort of being everywhere, any size, which is one thing that I'm obsessed with. Like I'm like, think bigger. Like there's no licensing here, like in terms of the size of this thing. It can be as big as King Kong, There's technology that really allows us to be in a lot of places remotely, which feels a little godlike. But also, once you're in those spaces, they could be beautiful, romantic, evocative moments. They could be very strong brand tie associations, or they could be pop-up commerce or showrooms, right? There's sort of not as much of a limit anymore in terms of what you can do there. So, I think about, the fashion stars in Marfa, where people drive outside of Austin and visit the iconic Prada store in the middle of the desert. While that location may not be the most practical, there's no reason why there aren't Prada stores in every room that you go into. It doesn't cost any more to drop something that doesn't weigh anything everywhere. Talk to me about your dreams, KP.
Ooh, how much time do we have? I mean, for me, as a self-proclaimed technologist, there is a fundamental reason for why I think technology matters to the humankind, and this is to make our lives better, but in a way that is not exclusive to the privileged ones. And I think, the form factor that can be introduced with, these wearables that we are all, working hard to bring to the market, and the experiences on top of that, that we are all trying to build, will allow access to information, whether it's for educational purposes, whether it's for, traveling and immersive experiences, when you do that, to everybody, I think, on the planet, in ways that I don't think we have been able to see to date with the mobile. Like, I've, traveled to India several times, I've traveled to Sub-Saharan Africa several times, and it's an interesting place. If you haven't been there, try to get out of Delhi, try to go to, a tier 2 or tier 3 town, when, people like us will feel, very privileged, but also maybe inspired about our responsibilities to give these people this access to the type of information and opportunities that we had that they may not have right now because of all the restrictions that their lifestyle introduces. And so if we manage to get to a point where the technologies that we are all working on provide, like I was given, a kid, that was born and raised in a small town in rural Greece, an opportunity like the one I have right now that I consider to be my privilege, to provide similar opportunities to the next generation of kids, and our kids and their kids, then I think it would be, like a dream that would come with a nice legacy and something that will make me very happy.
Well, and be behavior driving at the same time, which is, I always feel like, is an interesting subtext to the things that we decide to invest in these spaces, which is why it's a privilege to work at a company like Accenture, because folks don't tend to come to us for one-offs. They want to invest in something that's programmatic, and in that program, then we'll be able to see this evolution of behavior. We're stuck in sort of like the tornado of trying things, but you don't end up with benchmarks and you don't end up with behavior change when you try things once. So something that's super worthy like that would demand, for legitimacy, some provenance and some program, you know. So I love that. I'm going to let you. I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to ask you something a little bit more salesy. So tell us about Play Hybrid. We both work at big companies. People generally know what we do. But tell us a little bit about your company and tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're really excited to work on.
I guess I started Play Hybrid in 2014. We started as a video game company. I left DreamWorks Animation with my partner. We dove into gaming after my time at Ubisoft, and I think at first we were coming at a time where graphics were kind of shitty on iPhones, and we wanted to have film graphics on phones. And I think eventually it circled all the way back around with Universal, where we started taking character from DreamWorks, getting them on Instagram under 4 megs and Snap. And that was the limit, and I think it's still the limit. I think right now I'm super passionate about the micro formats because I think that's the way that people will be able to exchange assets and trade 3D assets. And how can we get people to move into the 3D space going beyond taking pictures with their phone, but just creating 3D on the fly and enabling people to create 3D very easily. I mean, I feel like now you have to jump in Maya, you have to learn software. It's hard and it's complicated.
Can I ask you a question, actually?
Yeah.
What would be an example use case of why someone would create 3D on the fly?
I remember talking with Chris Rice, and then I was like, hey, what's hot on Instagram? And they're like, hey, there's this guy, he scanned a Happy Meal, and he made it 3D, and they put it on IG, and it just blew up. And I'm like, it blows my mind, right? But it was someone that had the power to create some 3D and do something crazy and post it on IG, right? And that's what I want to see more. I want to be able to, see my parents grab a phone and create something.
Yeah. So, KP, you were talking about this backstage, actually, how sort of empowering the user, the end user, to become more involved in the creation process of XR is going to be fundamental to that behavior change.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of creation tools and platforms, right? And having compression that will be able to trade asset, right?
Yeah.
You should say the from to on the X-Wing.
Sorry?
Yeah, the asset, the X-Wing that you had. Like the file size you got it from to.
Oh, yeah,
Just
you
so
were
everyone
telling us.
knows.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
how
we're getting
radical it is.
files sometimes that, I think we got the TIE Fighter, and I was like, I don't know. I think it was 250 megs. We got it down to 1.7 megs. We got a mini at 650 megs. We got it down to 300 kilobytes.
Yeah.
Right.
So folks who are not crunching file sizes for a living, what that means is that the investment that you've made in the model is scalable. So if you have made something that's appropriate for a broadcast or for a film, that is now usable across e-commerce, across social media AR platforms, which are extremely restrictive in terms of file sizes, and nimble enough potentially to put it into consumer hands potentially, which makes the investment have so much longer legs.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when we did Poppy at DreamWorks for Trolls 2. We got this thing was 6 gig. It was insane. Wow. We got it on IG at 4 megs, and I think in organics they had millions of people creating content with it. I was like, wow, organically, people were just dancing with Poppy in their living room and posting it and just reusing it. I just blew my mind, the volume of people that it was just literally taken from DreamWorks pipeline, dance animation from them, piping it on IG, and then boom, it was just massive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
AP, what's your message for brands?
I mean, I think the last 2 years may have been a little bit interesting for most brands, right? Because there have been a lot of hype around certain things, be it blockchain or crypto, be it metaverse and stuff like that, and you're like, oh my God,
That's the title of this talk.
Yeah, what am I supposed to do? And I'm not supposed to swear here, but I would actually say sometimes it's easier than you think to tell what is real value for your business versus what is BS and you can probably ignore. Because at the end of the day, you know your business better and you know your customers better and you know what problems you are trying to solve that will make, like your interactions and the engagement model that you provide more meaningful for both parties, right? And I think, like the combination of those technologies that we are talking about here is probably something that you cannot ignore. But do you need to embrace all three at the same time? I would say start with the most obvious one. And then, like build your confidence, build your skills in-house, and try to expand such that you can find yourself eventually in that middle of that Venn diagram to the extent that it's applicable for your business, nicely and gradually. Not like jump on it, like with, like all your resources in one go and try to, like compete even internally, like with what technology will actually work best. Try with one or two that make sense, and then build your understanding of how those technologies can be beneficial to you. And then from then on, I'm pretty certain that you're not going to be left behind. I'm pretty certain that you're going to have a future that is brighter than the one you have right now.
Yeah, I mean, or come to Accenture and we'll do it for you. Yeah.
Great pitch.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the word metaverse has been problematic. And I think a lot of
Indubitably.
technologies have been clustered into that, probably unfairly. I think it actually has quite a specific meaning for me. And I think AR certainly has been clumped into that.
What's the meaning?
For me, metaverse is a digital destination, and it's about escapism. You're porting to a digital realm, effectively. And you see from Horizon Worlds, and obviously a lot of gaming titles are referred to as that. But I feel like it's been this sort of, it's in some respects been this category where AR and VR and mixed reality, everything of this sort of, just been lumped in there. And so it's got a lot of skepticism around it. Technologies, quite frankly, like mobile AR, just people shouldn't be skeptical about that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a now technology. It's a super scale technology. So for me, my main message to folks would be like, there's a lot of these in the world, like a lot of them, and they're incredibly capable. And augmented reality is incredibly powerful, and we've seen just how rapid Gen AI tools are evolving. So I think that the combination of these two things together, there's no reason to pause.
Yeah.
There's no proving grounds to be waited for to embrace what a phone can do right now. And I'd say like there's an inevitability to headsets. I think Meta's been very honest about it's a phenomenal engineering challenge. You're almost creating a secondary pair of eyes, just to be honest. And that's going to take some time. But why not start on the phone? You can still get billions of people, billions of reach. The return on investment is right there.
Yeah.
So I would say like, POCs on phones, there's no POC. You can march to production, you can get a lot of return. That's what I think folks should be embracing.
The event horizon is now. The future is actually right now. We used to say that at Meta all the time. They were like, no, it's now.
Yeah.
But I think that we need a little bit more divergent thinking and longer programmatic approaches to working with these technologies to make sure that we can really prove the actual value of them. We've got about 5 minutes, by the way. Do we have any questions? Ask a question. No, he's pretty good. Yeah.
Hi. This is such a great panel. You guys all did such a great job. So thank you from all of us in the audience. I have a question. It's something I was thinking about. James was saying something that sparked it in me, but it's the transition of making experiences, be they AR, XR, VR, a discovery mechanism to another experience or a product. It's the transition of that user behavior to that XR, VR, AR thing being the experience itself. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do,
any
yeah.
thoughts of how we engender that behavior shift in people? Because I think oftentimes the majority of us still see it as a discovery tool or as a way into another thing versus the thing.
Well, and also to be perfectly honest, the connective tissue between the AR thing and the thing we're linking to has not always been built seamlessly, right? And if you have a bad experience getting from an AR retail experience into a commerce experience, you might not come back. But more to your point, though, in the very complex XR experiences that I've built personally, people come in and look at the thing and they're like, whoa, and then sometimes don't do the thing that you've set them up to do. So, I mean, I don't know what you guys have I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but like AR as destination or AR as tool?
Well, I mean, as a social media company, we carry some degree of responsibility of trying to use a format that's very native to ours for the purposes of, I guess, expanding our inventory of ads. So to put it in a different way, right? You know, like if you're browsing through the Snapchat carousel, a video ad wouldn't make sense, but you know, like an AR that's sponsored by a brand totally makes sense because it's a native format, right? Now, whether that leads to an AR experience or something that just leverages the technology because it's cool and the brands want to adopt it, it's down to the brand. My preference would be for the brand to try to use a native format for a native experience. But we're not there yet. In a way, you know, like maybe this analogy is not perfect, but may resonate with you. If you want to advertise a new movie, you use video trailers to advertise it, right? But sometimes we have seen AR effects or lenses being used to advertise it, right? Okay, if there was an AR element in the movie, I think it would go even further. But the reality is that the best of both worlds would use AR both as a distribution channel, but also part of the experience. And I'm more committed to the latter part, personally, because I think that is what we call the always on type of thing.
Hi. So my question is, and this is really for Snap, because we do a lot of work with the different platforms, is I experienced this with video, you know, having sort of an IMF solution for asset creation that's interoperable amongst all the platforms is critical for sort of the mass adoption. And you look at video, you look at ProRes, MPEGs, I mean, everyone's got their own proprietary format. And ideally, like with 3D, we have GLBs, we got, you know, there's various formats that we can put out there. Are you really working with the Metas of the world and the Apples and trying to create a way to create an IMF solution?
Well, okay, it doesn't escape me the fact that, you know, like if you're a creator that monetizes, I think, their assets by distributing them to a wider audience, we are making it very hard for them right now because we have a proprietary stack, Meta has a proprietary stack, TikTok has a proprietary stack, right? But, you know, like any sort of attempt to create some sort of standard most likely is not gonna go all the way because each of us have different, you know, like unique capabilities around certain aspects of the technology that may not be universally, you know, like there, right? So it's not like a video where it's a format that, you know, like everybody can distribute anywhere. The way the technology works requires some, you know, like proprietary components that may not necessarily be available. So what we have been trying to do is at least try to understand what is the common ground. What is like the minimum denominator that I think may start with just a 3D asset that can be used, but then all the animation around the 3D asset, all the controls around how the asset behaves may be still proprietary within its platform. But hopefully that still reduces significantly the cost without necessarily taking away anything from the platform. Because the worst thing that can happen, sorry if I'm giving you a very long answer, is that the platform that has the least amount of capabilities is the one that most creators will end up defaulting. And then us having the superior, you know, like visualization engine for the 3D asset will be at fault because, like the creator will do just what works for TikTok, for example, and not respect, like the superiority of our platform, right? And that's not good, I think.
Really interesting. I think that we're out of time, actually, folks. Sorry for folks who are not obsessed with file types like we are, but we ended on a very inside track note. But thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you to Dom. Thank you to KP. Thank you to James. Thank you to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.